We've seen the Great War workhorse that was the Hotchkiss 1914, but this heavy machine gun wasn't too fun to carry around. So inventors Benet and Merci would lighten it up to take it on the attack. Hi, I'm Othais, and this is not a firearm whatsoever. This is just an accessory. I'm just going to get that right there and scoot it a little further back. That helps with the depth of field, although it's still fairly shallow in here, because this is the Hotchkiss Mark I Star, the Hotchkiss Portative. This is a lightened Hotchkiss machine gun. Let's get it over the light box. While only 2 inches shorter than its precursor at 26.5 pounds, this is nearly half the weight. Our example today is actually chambered for the British .303 cartridge, which feeds 30 rounds from a fixed metal strip, although that can be subject to change depending on conditions. The gun also was chambered in a number of foreign cartridges depending on who was using it. Okay, I'm going to just get this framed up a little bit better. Don't really have a monitor, but I'm going to guess that's pretty good. Alright, last time we saw one heck of a large gun in action. Today, let's get into how this became the final form factor of that same essential design, a roughly portable Hotchkiss. But first, a quick recap. During the Franco-Prussian War, an American munitions man set up shop in France. Following that conflict, Benjamin Hotchkiss would point his company at a quick-firing artillery system, a revolving cannon. This was hugely successful and found service around the world, even into World War I. It set the stage for the Hotchkiss Company to be interested in rapid-fire guns. In 1885, Benjamin Hotchkiss would pass away, and within a few years the company would come under the leadership of one Laurence Benet. This Yale graduate and son of U.S. Ordnance personnel and inventor took a shine to a French engineer already employed at the company, Henri Merci, who I sadly have almost no biographical data for, outside the fact that Henri was employed as a boy at Hotchkiss when it was first formed in France. Anyway, Benet and Merci both reviewed and purchased a patent offered up by one Austrian officer by the name of Othais. This gas piston operated machine gun wasn't quite ready for production, but it covered a number of key principles with great potential, so the Hotchkiss Company bought it up. Benet and Merci went to work on a military-ready design, and the result was the Hotchkiss Model 1896. This went through incremental changes all the way up until 1914, but overall the majority of the gun remained the same: big, heavy, and reliable. Alright, that has us all caught up from last time. Well, we also covered some service history, but really, by the time our gun here was in development, the big guy wasn't really in the field yet. Well, with the exception of Japan, and that would be rather key. Japanese use of machine guns, particularly the Hotchkiss, during the Russo-Japanese War in 1904 and 1905 would have observers reeling, and of course the Russians. The Japanese victory seemed incredible at the time, as the little island nation had rapidly modernized and now excelled beyond a known European power. For their part, the Russians were also already kinda early machine gun adopters. As we saw in our Maxim episode, they too fielded some excellent guns, but they were just behind the Japanese in terms of tactical use and deployment on an active battlefield. Japan pioneered a number of machine gun tactics during this conflict. Instead of just using them as light artillery and direct fire point defense, Japanese troops entrenched the guns, arranged cross fields of fire, and even took them on the attack, which was very difficult with the 50-plus pound Hotchkiss guns, along with then tripods and ammunition, and beyond. We're getting into 100, 150 pound territory here. Russia also became interested in using the machine guns on the attack, and so purchased a very new device then available in the military market. That would be the Madsen. Now, this is a later 1914 model, but the general pattern is the same: a light, handy, air-cooled, fully automatic contraption capable of being wielded by 1 or 2 soldiers and carried into an active battlefield, deploying only slightly slower than the average service rifle. Now, the Madsen is a gun we are going to get into more detail on fairly soon, but its appearance in the Russo-Japanese War seemed to inspire the Hotchkiss company, most notably Henry Merci, who believed that he could further refine and lighten the existing gigantic Hotchkiss machine gun. Sadly, I don't have any details of what inspired him specifically, and who gave additional help, or really any records of transitional models or prototypes. Instead, we pretty much skip straight into this patent, which depicts a radical departure from the original Ode Collect. It's definitely an entirely new gun with a myriad of features that are designed to compress and lighten it. We'll show you more of these when we get the gun in front of us, but for now, let's just name a few key features. The furniture nut is a rotating collar with locking lugs and an interrupted screw arrangement, like the Ross Mark III rifle, but a lot earlier. The feed strip system was flipped upside down to save space, and now uses a vertical cam outside of the receiver to pull the feed strip in. Also, the gun has a unique cocking arm that runs down the center of the piston assembly, again compacting the design. I know that was a little bit of a flyby, but don't worry, okay? We got more details. You know we like to animate things. The end result is that the giant Hotchkiss machine gun that we saw last time gets down to something, well, like this, weighing only as much as 3 service rifles and easily operated by a 2-man team, although the teams were often a little larger than that. Despite its bulk in hindsight, for the time, this is really portable, easily carried by a single man and capable of being packed with all of its gear on 2 mules, maybe 3 if you want some extra ammunition. Now, all this would be prepared by 1907, and in a testament to how well designed it was, changes from the 1907 to get to this particular thing would be very, very few, as I could find practically none mentioned in any of the development period, and there's certainly almost everything that's here was on the original patent. That's pretty rare. It also means that we can go ahead and just get a closer look at this particular gun. Now, in order to do that, I'm gonna have to get it off of its little tripod. This is a much later feature, as is that metal stock that you're seeing. Let me not crush anything down below. So when I go to look at this, I want to make sure that we're ignoring the grip and we're ignoring the stock. We're going to look at everything forward to that, though, because it all stays pretty much the same. So let's get a closer look. Okay, if you can't tell, there is a lot going on in this gun because a lot of the features were externalized, but let's go from front to back. We got our front sight. We've got our, actually this is a tab that is used as a bipod setting position for some of the early guns. As you will later see, we use this as a later style gun. We have our gas tube adjustment right here. This is to affect our gas pressure. It's not really for fire rate, it's about tuning the system into running smoothly, depending on the load that's in the cartridges. This brass piece was fitted later, probably special use for a vehicle mount of some kind. It's not really what we're worried about today. If we go down, we've got our cooling fins. We also have a heat shield that's attached to this whole lower gas tube assembly that keeps us from playing with the gas piston head, keeps our hands cool when handling it. As I move back, these are original style lugs, same as the ones up front, again designed for being able to be mounted to various tripods, bipods, vehicles, etc. If I get her back even further, we got some craziness going on. We've got an overall spring that is responsible for acting on this arm that is tucked back up in here. More on that guy later. This is an exterior camming function, so what our bolt is doing is rocking this back and forth, and it's being lifted and dropped. And what that does is it's a finger that just sort of moves the feed strip. So actually I can go ahead and show you that. Let me get this settled just a bit. These guys use the same Hotchkiss style feed strip with ammo. These are live, so I won't actually be inserting them in the gun, but unlike the previous gun where they went in nice and flat, they go in overhead. So they would actually feed with the rounds hanging down from this position, which means that having the tension on these springs is very important on this particular Hotchkiss because they're hung upside down. It gets loose, they fall off, that jams up the gun because you're missing a round when you expected to have one in the feed. So pretty critical stuff. Now, when you want to use these guys, there's kind of a procedure. So right now, I believe the gun is low and in lockout, so it's been cocked at some point recently. It's not ready to take ammo, so if I were to even set this into fire and try to pull the trigger, I wouldn't get anything out of her because, just like with the other Hotchkiss, unless it detects a feed strip, it's not ready to go. And when I say detects, it means that you manually provide it. So you have to punch this button up right here. There we go. Once that clicks up, system's ready to accept a strip. Now in this case, our bolt is back. It's an open bolt system, so it's ready to rock and roll as long as we were to take one of these and insert them. That's all you do. You just insert it. On the other side of the gun, if I flip this thing around, you'll know when you have a fully inserted strip because, good Lord, guys, right there, that little button that I'm poking at, if you get around where it belongs, he will, and I'm trying not to destroy my finger in here, I can't do it, it's gonna tear up my fingernail too bad, it's pretty firm and sharp, but he will push out. And so that's an indicator for loading right there, available for you to see. Whew, okay, so what else is going on? Well, our rear sight is here, adjustable tangent sight. I believe these are sighted for 2,800 meters. This one looks like it's set for 2,000 meters, actually. And then if I bring her on back, actually British, this may still be yards. So let me bring her on back. We have a takedown screw here, more on that guy in a moment. And then we're gonna ignore this whole rear stock assembly for the immediate few minutes. So I'm gonna get this guy spun around for you. And we'll see at the very tail end of it, ignore the stock that's waving around in your face. At the very tail end of it, we have our whole cocking arm and selector. So currently the gun is in safe. That's what the S is for, if you can make that out on there. And then if I pop her up, we're in repeating fire, so semi-automatic. And if I pop her up again, we're fully auto. If I go all the way up, we have the ability to yank this back and cock the whole system and then engage it to whatever position we want. And then there's actually a D on there for a disassembly position. Show you that a little bit later. Now, in terms of cocking this gun, I want to show you guys something pretty clearly. So I'm going to grab that tripod again. Get her mounted because it's the only way to really do this on camera. This gun, I have noticed, is probably the worst in terms of, I don't know, cocking strength or putting the force where you want it, because what happens is, let me get this thing into a fire position. This is already upped. Notice how many things you have to remember, right? So I'm gonna get this back. I'm gonna hold it. I'm gonna pull the trigger and let the bolt down easy. So, you know, as with all things, there's what you say, and then there's what you do. There we go, with this gun. Now you notice as this came forward, this guy dropped, so therefore it's empty. So this locks the system out, it locks the bolt rearward, ready to accept another strip, unless there's already a strip there, at which point it doesn't drop, and the system keeps cycling. I hope that makes sense. So now I've got the bolt forward in the system, so I can show you what it's like to have to cock this thing. So if we had had a dry fire, or if we had had a cartridge that just sort of failed, bad primer or something like that, you have to get this guy all the way up, you have to yank him back, and somewhere in here is a disassembly position that if you miss and you catch that disassembly position, and I've done it at least once on the field, of course now that I'm trying to do it, it's not so bad, but there is a little horror spot right there where you can accidentally just disassemble the gun, so don't accidentally do that. But assuming you don't catch that exact spot, you go up top, you're at 12 o'clock-ish, you pull her back, and you suddenly meet resistance, and it's terrible. It's about 30 pounds, and then you have to be able to push that through, and the problem with it is, on this particular gun, you're holding on this little handle, and it's an extended rod that's maybe half an inch thick, 3/4 of an inch thick at best, and it makes you nervous. You don't want to bend it. And so I find it probably best when I'm actually using the gun to have a shoulder in this position, cross hands, and push my hand towards my shoulder, click, and I've got her. but it's still quite a bit of force, and it makes you nervous as heck because you're at the end of this wiggly rod and you don't want to tear up the gun. Obviously, it doesn't actually tear up the gun. It just drives you crazy to see it. Now, I know a lot of you want to see this disassembled, and we've actually already done that thanks to Project Lightning. So I'm going to save a little bit of time and kick that over to myself so you can see most of the disassembly process there, and then I'm going to take you just a little bit further with this gun. We've already dropped the bolt just because we were messing with it a moment ago. So that's already forward, so that would be sort of your first step. I have to turn a knob on this side of the gun, rotate that guy around and around and around. Don't lose him, he's not captive. From there, I can go ahead and switch up to disassembly position. Once I'm partially out, I just gotta rotate over to the right. You'll find that sweet spot where she'll just slide on out. Charging handle is out and down. From there, all I have to do is grab the handle, push forward a bit, and you can see she drops out. Careful, there's a spring under tension in there. From here, it's really just about getting a hold of what is the gas piston. So I can keep doing that with my hand. The other thing I've found is that I can actually get this guy in here, turn him a bit, and I can fish it, and it's a lot easier, but it's not a positive grip. You might end up kind of bapping yourself with it if you're not paying attention. So I'm gonna pull this guy out. Careful not to lose the bolt. All right, now that went pretty fast because we were just trying to get to the bolt. So let me show you a few things up close. This is our bolt with its serrated locking lugs. It does not turn, the furniture nut turns around it. We'll see that better in the animation. Here's the firing pin that rests in there and a guiding cam that sits in a raceway in the top of the receiver so that this can't be dropped too soon. We have our mainspring, obviously. We have our big old piston with a channel cut in here, a guiding surface, if you guys can see that nicely. That's going to show back up in the animation just so you can see it in person as well. And then we've got our actually cocking rod with its multi-function purpose, and then the guideways and stuff that allow it to go over to the disassembled position versus assembled position. And then all it's really doing when it does the difference between semi, full auto, or safe is these cuts here are preventing that trigger group from operating the way that it wants to. So when we pull the trigger, there is actually a big old group back here. If I can get this, let me get that to the rear. So if you look here, right there at that little guy, see him coming back, depending on whether he's allowed to come back at all, come back and then get depressed, or just come back straight, means that it either releases or does not release this little booger back here. And again, you know what? I'm not gonna do the balancing act. I'm gonna leave you to have seen this and pay closer attention in the animation. But we still have a little disassembly to go. And in that case, I wanna show you something that we did not cover in Lightning, which is this section of the feed system. This would ultimately be a feed block, except for the fact that it doesn't really come off the gun. So it's not so much a block as it is just the whole feed system. So if I get that where you can see it, it's just one big crazy spring over top. And if I kind of shove her and play with her just right, I can get her lifted off of the tab here, pull her back, lift her again, make sure she's not getting snagged on anything. And of course she always is, there we go. And then this will, for those of you who watched Project Lightning, this is the piece that was not secured quite right and popped off during Mae's hip fire. So, not a common problem, just one that we caused when we were clearing a jam and accidentally lifted it off of this little collar, which again is never get out of sequence with the Hotchkiss Portative. So back here, we flip our rear sight forward because we need just enough clearance here. So God help you if you change the pitch of this guy, but lift up and turn. Oop, I'm sorry. Open the little cover. Haha, that would help, huh? Then lift up and then rotate free, and then boom, this guy falls out. And that's what was doing all of our work in terms of moving the strips. So let me get this swung out of the way. That's fairly balanced. This guy, what he's doing the whole time is he's working against the teeth in this little guy. So what he does is, let me get him lined up so I can see which one's which, because you know, you never want to be wrong about these things. He sits down, and I actually have a high speed so you can see this, but he just grabs and then twists it forward and then comes up, comes down, grabs and twists it forward. Let me show you some video of that because it's pretty cool. It literally is just a little finger that's sticking itself in there, pulling, popping up, sticking itself in there, pulling, popping up. Wild to see something like that in a machine gun system where you can see it. Like it tells you how mechanical these things really are. They're Rube Goldbergian in their nature. All right, so that's the whole gun disassembled. Like I said, I could get the barrel off of here with the proper wrench that I don't have, and Mark just got this set up really well. The only thing that I'm gonna get out of it by taking that off is the furniture nut would come out. That's the little piece that's down in here, and I'm gonna tell you, if we didn't have an animator going, I would probably be doing it for you, but we do have an animator, so let's go ahead and get a look at the guts with some help from VBB SMYT. First, we will cock the action by rotating the charging handle to the topmost position and pulling rearward. Pressing it back forward, we can now select S for safe. In this position, the plate prevents the trigger from being pulled. In R, for repeating fire, the trigger can be pulled but is cammed downward on each shot. This pitches the front trigger bar too high to snag the sear, forcing single shot fire. In the A automatic fire position, the trigger is level, leaving the bar engaged on the sear. With the action locked open, we'll load a strip. Do not forget to press up on the feed piece. Adjust sights and switch to semi-auto fire. One pull of the trigger, one round downrange. Usually. This is a gas piston operated action, so that means that excess gas pressure from the cartridge operates the gun. Locking is achieved by a furniture nut here in purple. This piece rotates around the serrated bolt head into and out of lock. It is guided by a raceway in the gas piston assembly. Once the gun is locked, the firing pin, also carried by the gas piston assembly, strikes the primer of the next round, discharging it. The pin is guided by a raceway in the receiver, keeping it from moving forward until the bolt is in lock. Two sloped grooves in the piston assembly operate on the feed piece, tipping it back and forth. On the right-hand stroke, its tapered finger rises up over the strip and falls into the next notch. On the left-hand stroke, it indexes the strip forward. We can see more of that operation here, along with down below the ejector. Once empty, the strip is flung clear, and the feed piece falls lower, locking the piston assembly to the rear. This leaves the gun ready to load another strip. Now, if you enjoyed this animation, there's more of it and others over at the YouTube page of VBB SMYT. We thank him a lot for his help. Now, I know a lot of you are trained to see these guns in action right after the animation, but as of yet, no one has actually adopted this firearm, so let's keep digging. Right away, the French would take a look at the thing. Testing it in October of 1907, they found no real faults. As a matter of fact, they were very impressed. However, they didn't know exactly what they were supposed to do with this thing. Machine guns were still sort of a light artillery in their minds, and the tactics to use a lightened machine gun were just not fully realized in the French system yet. Russia, Germany, and Great Britain would all have a sniff as well, but again, similarly rejected. Well, there was one country that would bite. Someone who wanted a light machine gun that they could take into battle just like a big old rifle. And yeah, that would be back home in the good old US of A. Don't forget Lawrence Benet was an American, one who had kept his citizenship all these years, and his father, General Stephen Benet, had been Chief of Ordnance of the United States Army at one time. So he had some inroads he could try out. And that meant that he could take this gun back over to the US and show them just what they were missing, because at that point they had the Maxim model 1904. This is perhaps the heaviest of the new style Maxims ever issued anywhere in the world, and honestly, it was kind of a mess. The US had trialed the larger, earlier Hotchkiss gun and wasn't super impressed with that either, and so they had taken the Maxim instead, but that too wasn't really cutting it. They'd sort of overbulked it in their requirements. This was not the powerhouse US Army that we know today. This was a smaller, much thriftier frontier army, and the focus was on covering long distances over rugged terrain with small numbers of men. So the idea of a man-portable machine gun, essentially a machine rifle, well, that seemed really good to the US. So after trialing, they would be the first major buyer of what they then called the Machine Rifle Model 1909, or the Benet Merci. They would actually be the only country to commonly name the two creators, and the rest of the world, well, they just sort of knew this as the Portative, the Hotchkiss Portative. 29 were ordered directly from Hotchkiss in St. Denis, and the balance was produced by Colt and Springfield. Now, I've heard 670 produced for the entire US Army, but I've also heard 400 for the Navy and Marines combined, so I'm unsure what the real total was, whether it was 670 or somewhere up around 1,070 for the entire armed forces. Not an insane number in either case, but this was a start. And at the time, the US military forces were very small, so it was a fair win. Okay, so the US bought it in 1909. Who else was looking for a light machine gun? Well, France ordered 100 for testing in 1911, but these would not arrive until 1913 and 1914. And while they were nominally adopted, they were really only for cavalry cyclists, and as we'll eventually see, they found their way into some aviation testing. So France wasn't a huge supporter of the system. The Belgians were curious. Their Inspector General of Artillery thought that they could use a lightened automatic. These would be useful for cavalry, cyclists, and horse artillery, an effective way to make smaller mobile units highly effective, and a really good defense for field artillery, like a crazy good defense for field artillery. Belgium started trialing the guns in 1912, and with time, a few names would emerge as being of merit. The Madsen, the Hotchkiss Portative, the Lewis gun, which had finally arrived, and the Berthier light machine gun. We've mentioned that last one before, as the US Navy kind of considered a variant of it, but ultimately it never saw adoption. This was an abandoned design. The Madsen suffered issues being converted to the 7.65 Belgian cartridge, more on that another day, and the Lewis gun, well, we actually have an entire episode on the Lewis gun, which found its way into Belgian hands. Now, funnily enough, all of this kicked off because the artillery were curious about a light machine gun. Once the Army noticed how much effort was being spent on this entire endeavor, they stepped in and toned it way down. They really weren't looking to buy anything soon, and they really weren't looking to rearm the cavalry with a machine gun because that would just slow cavalry down. That's not what they're for. So, you know, with the rising tension though, the Portative did get to see a sort of limited official adoption, with a small order placed 3 weeks before war were declared. Oh yeah, now Belgium wants some guns. At the time of German invasion, they had 6 Portatives on hand from the trials, and they fielded all of them in the fight. 4 went to the regular army, and 2 remained with Cyclist Battalion that was actually in the middle of testing them when everything broke out. They proved their worth while being pitted against German cavalry. You wouldn't think some dudes on bicycles to take on, elite horsemen, but throw a pair of light machine guns in the mix and it evens the odds out quite a bit. All 6 guns were also present at the Battle of Halen, again wreaking havoc against German cavalry. These things were pretty hot ticket. While all this was happening, the Hotchkiss Company in St. Denis worked as hard as they could to put more guns, both the heavy and the light Hotchkisses, into the Belgian hands. Of course, as we know, the defense of Belgium was only to delay the Germans in the end, though valiantly, it was enough time to let the Entente organize themselves. As we covered last episode, Hotchkiss would soon be moved to put to work overtime fulfilling French army demands alone. By August of 1915, Belgium would have only 66 Portatives in inventory, which is still a pretty good number for such a rushed production. They were probably buying them right off the sales floor. With the start of the war, the French would focus more on heavy machine guns, and as we saw last time, they would ultimately favor the reliable Leviathan, the Hotchkiss 1914. Again, the St. Denis Hotchkiss factory was too close to the front line, so it was moved further into France. And at the same time, the Portative production was moved out of the country entirely. In order to best focus on one task at a time, France and Britain had negotiated to have all the heavy 1914s produced in Lyon and all the Portatives in a factory to be set up in Coventry. This deal was negotiated through May of 1915, and then the factory was built with rather extreme difficulty. Problems included sourcing equipment, sourcing workers, finding trained supervisors, unreliable subcontractors who switched around like crazy, and worker strikes. So production at this new Hotchkiss artillery works would not start until December of the same year. So that means there was a very large production gap for the Portative. Official British adoption came December 6th. The first guns were focused on cavalry and infantry use, allowing for rapid deployment and overwhelming firepower. The first pattern of the gun was called the Mark I and used a lighter bipod all the way at the front along with a wooden stock. There were still 2 lugs near the center in case the gun needed mounting in a fixed position or on a vehicle like this one has right here. And this is where it starts to go wrong for the British. That stock is a pain in the butt, so in June of 1917, they develop a new variant. And that, finally, is our gun today, the Mark I Star, which represents the pistol grip and optional detachable shoulder stock. With, by the way, I want to point out, let's make this very clear, folks, it's got a shoulder thing that goes up. So now that we actually have the gun that you see in front of us, which is really only marked by the fact that it has a pistol grip, a cross screw right here that I unscrew and this whole thing comes off, and that's it, well, we can finally get over to Mae and let her shoot this thing off for you.
Well, it's supposed to be semi-auto, but I'm betting we're getting some short stroking due to ammo. Normally you would tighten the gas system, but we're down as far as it would like to go without modification.
I hope that was worth the wait because I know I enjoyed this gun. Now, the Mark I Star did see pretty heavy use with Indian troops on the Western Front and in Mesopotamia. The Australian Light Horse were also armed with this particular tripod version. That actually does allow me to point out one other thing, which is this little shortened strip. Now, let me get this zoomed in for you guys. I can fit it up under this gun. Oop, I can sort of fit it up under this gun. Where am I at? There we go. That'll work. So this is a 14-round quick strip. Now these were rapidly deployable by cavalry. They could be carried up on your chest or on your hip, and it allowed you to get the gun into operation a lot faster. There's also some story that these could be used when you deployed the gun for anti-air use, because since everything hangs upside down with the cartridges below, if you're trying to swivel the gun quickly and you don't have somebody to sort of support because they can't, they're going to slice their hand up trying to follow you while you're tracking an airplane, or it'd be banging into something. These are also good for anti-air use. Just a cool little bit of history. Anyway, truth be told, the Mark I Star was not really an infantry light machine gun, but we'll get to its real role at the very end. In the meantime, we've been ignoring the French. So, speaking of aircraft, way back in February of 1914, before the war, they had slapped a Portative onto a Dapper du Sun. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. In about the most terrifying way imaginable, that gunner had to stand, and he was in the way of the pilot's view. That's not great. However, this was an obvious step in the right direction. It was the first fixed, dedicated machine gun in a military airplane, and it would soon prove to be important research. With the war on, 6 Voicens would be equipped with Portatives, and on October 5th of 1914, they'd claim the first aviation machine gun victory of the war, downing a German aviatic after 47 rounds fired. While impressive, this is still just a hodgepodge system. In hindsight, we know the key will be to give the pilot a fixed forward gun, something that's right along his line of sight. The trouble is, that's where the propeller goes on the best airplanes. Puller types did a better job in a fight, but there's all that wood spinning right here. Now, some pilots got brave and they just fired through the propellers anyway. The fire rate of the guns versus the turn speed of that thing, it worked out that hits were fairly infrequent, and it took a mix of sustained fire and some bad luck to actually down a plane this way, but at the same time, it was extremely distracting with dangerous splinters and whizzing bullets flying around whenever you did have a strike. That's not going to help your aim any. So in steps Roland Garros. Now, he had already been famous as a pilot and race winner before the war, and during, he would pioneer air combat with both his skill and inventiveness. While visiting the Morane-Saulnier works, he was shown an early version of a reinforced propeller. This was meant to prevent damage by deflecting any bullets that might strike it at the rear. The design was actually meant to be a safety system. This is in case a then experimental synchronizer failed. Now, interrupter gears, which prevented fire while the blade passes, were being patented before the war, but synchronizers, which proactively fire when there is an opening, were a bit newer, and both methods were still complicated and unperfected at this time. So these were not necessarily combat ready, and Garros knew this and took no chances. His mechanic disabled the synchronizer, and so our pilot simply relied on the safety deflectors as his main advantage instead of a failsafe. And with it, he'd go on to down 3 aircraft in April of 1915, which was all the more impressive because he'd be downed on the 18th, and gliding his plane safely to the ground, it would be captured by the Germans, who found most of a synchronizer assembly on board, which hurried along their own working prototypes into final production. Now, synchronizer gears are a history I would like to get into separate from the machine guns. Hopefully we'll get to that soon. While a cool piece of history for the Hotchkiss, these Lighten guns would not remain an aircraft favorite for very long. They faced competition from the Lewis gun, and minus its cooling shroud, that was a very light and handy firearm. Those guns also had really quick loading 97 round drums, and they were being cranked out faster than the Hotchkiss, and actually were a fair bit lighter. Competition also came from the larger Vickers machine gun, which was favored for its use of belted ammunition and extreme reliability. The Vickers remained the aircraft favorite throughout the war, and the Hotchkiss could use essentially a segmented strip. I actually have one here. But a lot longer, wrapped up in a drum. But the Vickers was also compatible with a new interrupter gear technology. So that means that the Portative's on its way out. It can't do the very best thing. So where do we stand now? Well, the Portative was used by Belgium before the collapse. It served with the British ground forces in some armored cars and planes, especially with France, where it was instrumental in early air combat, but it was quickly displaced by the Lewis and Vickers. Well, at least it was the standard machine gun of the United States, right? We talked about that earlier. Those Merci should come in handy, huh? Yeah, not so much. In March of 1916, Pancho Villa attacked Columbus, New Mexico. This raid was meant to bolster his weakened forces, but the U.S. 13th Cavalry was unexpectedly present and had a pair of Model 1909 Mercies on hand. While these guns were fielded to some effect and the Villistas repulsed, it had done considerable damage to the town, and problems were encountered trying to run the light machine guns in the dark. For starters, the US guns were especially prone to breaking firing pins, which, as you saw, require a significant amount of disassembly to get in there and replace them. Trying to do all of that at night is probably not the best thing for your sanity. Loading the gun at night was also difficult thanks to the fine motor function required to get one of those strips lined up exactly right in this tray. Most of that comes from the fact that you have to have the vertical and the horizontal. You have to have two dimensions just right and slipped in there with no bends. However, period claims at the time would just say, oh, you could load it upside down and then it would jam up. If it was really just that simple, we would have the worst machine gun training in the world. Instead, it's probably just that they're so finicky to align and you can't really touch your way through it. Newspapers at the time had a field day calling out the US Army. They claimed the guns were inferior and could only be used in broad daylight. With the nickname Daylight Gun starting to stick, our good old friend Crozier got involved to clear things up. This was, of course, Chief of Ordnance William Crozier, who we've ranted on several times over whenever machine guns are involved. Well, this time around, he had a beautiful quote. "We have no gun of any kind that can be used at any time except in daylight by a man who must depend on his eyesight for such operations." That's not helping the matter. So it's no surprise that the US would go on to adopt the Vickers gun, and then immediately after that, the Browning, which we actually finally kept for, 100 or so years. I guess that's a pretty good design. So the Merci, a close cousin to this guy, was used during the Mexican punitive expedition, mostly because it was already there, but as far as the Great War goes, it really only came in handy for training, and unlike the Krag, we can't seem to find any proof of actual field service. Well, so far the Hotchkiss Portative, it's a mixed bag. I did promise, though, to bring out this Mark I star pattern again, because this gun was developed for a very specific vehicle use, and we've clearly left a very new sort of war machine out of the conversation so far. Oh yeah, it's the tank. The Mark I Hotchkiss Portative was perfect for the tank, and that's because it's short, it's air-cooled, it does not have that crazy Lewis gun jacket, which in a hot tank interior was only going to pump more hot air into the barrel anyway, so you can take a Mark I star, equip a segmented strip like we saw before, like this, wrapped up on a roller, and slap on a brass catcher on the sides so that you're not throwing brass all around the inside of your tank, and you are in business. Finally, a niche where no one else can compete. All along, over a decade before the tank was conceived, the perfect gun was there, sitting and waiting for a pistol grip. That was really it. With the British cranking these guns out, somewhere around 40,000 were produced by the end of the war, which is also when they halted production. It sounds pretty impressive, but it actually required a lot of effort, raw material, and milling time to manufacture something like this gun. This is a very complicated light machine gun. You see, as simple as the Hotchkiss is in terms of large parts groups that I can sort of pull out and have just a block of stuff here on the table, it's chock full of fancy shapes that take a lot of time to mill on the machine. For the production cost of a single Hotchkiss, you could get like 5 Shoshaws. Mind you, they are Shoshaws, but you get 5 to 1. It just wasn't an easily mass-produced system. Functionally, the guns required more training as they were a bit more fiddly. Parts breakage was better in Europe than the US, but it was still at a higher rate than other guns. And overall, it's just the sort of thing that you don't want to come out of sequence on. You see us all the time with this gun having little fiddly bits where we got to get it right and we got to get it in order. They also required a good bit of gas pressure adjustment, and that gas tube up here fouled pretty easily, so you had to take it apart and clean it almost every time you had any long bursts of fire. The rest of the guns, well, they were pretty resistant to dirt. As long as you didn't get the ammo set up just right, you were ready to rock and roll, so I can't hate it too much. Mild recoil, fairly accurate, and not a lot of heat at the back end of the gun. Portatives would be adopted, as we covered, in the US, Belgium, France, and by the United Kingdom. Coventry also produced guns for Russia and Romania during the war. Further purchases were also made before and after the war by China, Brazil, Spain, Greece, Mexico, and Norway. At the beginning of 1916, the Coventry Hotchkiss Artillery Works were averaging about 30 guns per week. But by the end of the war, this rose to 420 guns per week, with somewhere over 35,000 produced in total. There would also be a Hotchkiss automatic rifle along the lines of the Shosha or BAR, but that never saw sincere production. Okay, 2 big episodes in a row, so why don't we go right now, leave the history behind, leave all the fiddly bits behind, and get into Mae and see if she can give us an opinion comparatively on the Hotchkiss Portative. Alright, we made room for Mae, and we've made room for our second Hotchkiss, this time the Hotchkiss Portative. Now, last time we talked about the 1914, and as I recall, we liked it, right?
Yeah, it was a very positive review. I love that gun.
Okay, I might have gushed. But the only problem with the Hotchkiss 1914 was its incredible size and weight. So this is a lighter, smaller Hotchkiss, so that means that this is going to be the ultimate battlefield machine gun. Would you agree?
It's...
We have complicated feelings about this gun, so this might run a little bit long because we have to explain them in detail. But let's do it a little bit at a time so that it makes a little bit of sense. Let's go with the ergonomics. And so let's go from your first blush on this thing all the way through what it's like to actually carry it and put it down somewhere. How does it feel to handle and have in your hands the Hotchkiss Portative?
At first glance, this gun has a lot going on with it. There's a lot of what seems like extra knobs and springs and tabs and buttons sticking out the side. I mean, there seems to be like this is a very busy gun in terms of look, and it looks cool. It looks cool as heck. It looks so steampunk. It's actually a very dynamic look to it. It looks like it's going to kick my butt.
It is practically a machine gun turned inside out. Yes,
it really is. There's definitely not an elegance to it. It's very rugged and rough looking. It's very cool, I will say that. When I go to pick it up though, portable is a word you could use. It is that. But it is incredibly heavy. I mean, for reals, guys, I cannot emphasize that enough. And unfortunately, there's no real easy place to carry this gun because you go to pick it up and you want to pick it up and put the feed block right where your tummy is. It's the same issue with the 1914, but the problem is again, that's where you put the strip in,
It's technically lighter than an MG-815, but an MG-815, you grab either the stock or the pistol grip, you grab the water jacket, and it sets the flat side of the receiver, if you're right-handed, it sets the flat side of your receiver right up against your stomach or your hip, and you can kind of get it and go. This, if you have the tripod mounted, God help you, because that thing's going to plow into your thigh or your hip bone or whatever. Where you want to grab this one, the intuition is to grab the pistol grip or the stock, and then grab that sort of heat shield that's up around the gas piston.
That gets warm. Just so you know, with use.
Not as warm as it could.
No, not as warm as it could, but that does eventually get warm.
But that's sort of the two places that you grab it, and then that just sort of puts all this pointy stuff. I mean, there's little sharp things on here that just jab right into you.
Which, by the way, it is something you kind of think of when you first see it, but it really isn't until you've got it rubbing up against your stomach or your hip, or you're constantly banging your hip bone into it. Yeah, that was me. Hi. That you really realize that I feel like it's going to knock a piece off. I really thought my hip bone was going to bump that indicator like button off the side practically at one point.
This is a gun that is heavy enough that I don't want to drop it 3 feet. Like, no. I don't know that you could hold it at arm's length and let it go. and not damage it on hard ground. Like, I would be scared of having the rear sight knocked off. I'd be scared of damaging the spring that controls the feed system. I mean, these are really the vulnerable bits we're talking about right here. The rest of it's actually pretty rugged, I give it that. But this worries the heck out of me, this whole feed block system up here.
And then when I'm going to set it down into the ground, I finally got it to a resting place. And I put that crow's feet tripod down to the ground. I'm thinking because of, I can see just how long those prongs are at the bottom. And I personally thought when I first set it down, it was going to sink in real deep and be nice and sturdy. And I thought, oh, great, 3 feet. This can't be possibly worse than 2 feet. I don't know if it would have been better or not. Honestly, unfortunately, it's just because of there's so many points in which this tripod moves about. I mean, you can bucket like forward and back very easily, and it just felt like at no point was it really set in the ground well.
There are basically 3 points of articulation on the tripod as it stands here. One is where it's actually mounted to the gun. That's a forward and back rotation. And then there's a section on the tripod itself that also allows the whole head to rotate forward or back. So you have double articulation in one direction. So you can rock forward and then rock forward again. It's very odd feeling. And then it has a hinge that rocks left to right. So you have 2 actual axes, but then you have a double ability to rotate forward. And so you have this like snaking, disjointed. We talked about this in our Project Lightning with Ian McCollum. He had the same problem with it where it's like, it's a very weird fluid feeling.
Now, the positive thing with this, though, the positive part is that for swiveling, for changing targets, it's fantastic.
Oh,
it's
right in the middle of the gun?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful with that. But then on the downside you've got is that it moves around very easily, which means with recoil and everything else, that if you aren't set just right, it can move you about around a good bit.
I will pay it a compliment. Out of all the light machine guns we've handled to date, if you were the kind of person that had experience, let's say you had 50 hours on every one of the guns, this one would change targets fastest.
It would. It absolutely.
So that is where they were going, I'm sure, with this tripod system, is giving it ultimate articulation and flexibility. It's also just an extremely complicated and heavy tripod, though. And then, like Mae said, with the 3 feet, you set it down. If you try to push forward or back on it too much, one of the 3 feet comes out and the whole thing sort of tips up, unbalanced. It's almost better to just have 2 feet and be able to rock forward and back on them. But this is the direction they went with.
But anyway, ergonomics looks cool. It unfortunately has a bunch of stuff jutting out the side of it that don't make it easy for portability and also make me feel like it could be a vulnerable gun. And then on top of that, moving it around, setting it down, it's awkward and heavy and big. And that crow's feet tripod is not doing it for me.
So we're down to the rear of the gun then, which means the shoulder stock, which is currently detached, and this is an expedient stock. The Mark 1s would have had a nice big wood stock, but they still would have had this option at the rear. And then the other thing is, you haven't really talked about operating this cocking handle, like this whole thing. I say cocking handle, but this is the heart of the whole operation of the gun. Is this lets you select safe fire, semi, all that other stuff. What are these 2 devices like for you when you're actually behind the gun?
So for the shoulder mount, honestly, I could never figure out what was best because I felt like every time I had it flipped up for the tab that it kept pushing the gun down, which wasn't like the front end down, which wasn't really super helpful. So unfortunately, I wasn't sure if that was helpful or not in that route because whenever I flipped it and put it back forward, it felt like I didn't have as much of a positive grip with my shoulder with it. So I couldn't figure out what was best in the end. I think maybe Othais was too tall for it. So for him, it wasn't even going to work at all.
Oh, there's no choice. I mean, for my position, this thing is an almost acute angle. I mean, it is slightly wide. I mean, I don't know that this section right here is 90 degrees even. So when I set it on my shoulder, it just digs a corner in on my shoulder and it feels like there's some pressure on top and that's it. It feels miserable. So I had it down every time I used it and I found it to be much easier. This was superfluous to me. And then, I'm sorry, the cocking handle.
Yeah. So the cocking handle, honestly, it's interesting. So you've got multi-positions with it, which is, in some ways, I actually find kind of convenient that you can set every position you want with just one piece. So I can set it for safety, semi, full auto. I can set it for the disassembly part. Like I can set the gun up for whatever state I want it to be in on just the cocking handle. And it's actually convenient that it does say on the back of it, like with little letters, essentially which phase of the moon, I guess you're at with that. What position it's in is what it is, but I didn't find it difficult to operate. It was just a matter of making sure you put it in just the right spot. It never once slipped out of a position.
No, it didn't bump around, but I'm going to tell you from my experience, I just got lost on that thing. I don't know about you, but I could not get behind it. It's kind of like the universal gauge on an old Jeep, where it's like, it's cool that you have everything in one cluster, but then it ends up being crowded. And so you're putting too much in one place versus being able to be like, safety over here, flip that off, mode select over here, flip that. BAR didn't bother me though, because it was just a switch. So I guess maybe I'm talking on my butt. But the thing that really drove me crazy about this thing, and I've already said it earlier in the episode, is that when you draw this back, it is an extremely heavy spring. It's extremely there's so little purchase on it. I mean, I
was going to get into that.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
It's incredibly difficult to get back. Honestly, for me, I think I managed to successfully draw that bolt back once or twice from the shoulder, but the rest of the time I had to pop my knee down on the ground in order to just get enough of a positive position behind that bolt handle in order to pull her back. She is heavy.
Yeah, Ian and I are both adult males, and both of us struggled to use it from the shoulder to full cock. And then you did manage to pull it off a couple times, but it almost blew your shoulder out. It was better to get you up out of position. So if you're exhausted, if you're in a fight and you have, bad primer or something like that, and you have to clear jam, you need to clear jam with some sense of hurriedness. It's not just get it open. It's get it open with a pop. It is very hard to pop that open. It is very stiff. Now, the way the gun runs, it should never actually close. The bolt should always be open the way the gun runs when it runs properly. Bad ammo, though, and you've got to reset it. And that is a huge pain.
Oh, yeah. I definitely did not care for that.
All right, so that covers the basic ergonomics. We have one other thing to talk about, which is actually loading the strips in this thing. I don't want to trigger a PTSD moment for you, but did you want to talk about really how fun it is to get one of these into that?
Yeah, honestly, feeding with this one was a difficult trial to say the least. Unfortunately, having it in just the right position in the tray when you popped it in was not an easy task to get used to because you couldn't really feel that it was right. The only way that you knew you'd positively popped it in was once the indicator was popped. So not only was the strip shoved all the way in at that point, but the round was ready to be fed through.
There's ways to get this in there wrong.
Yeah.
And then it's so close. That's the one thing. If you get it wrong, it's not like you get it a little bit wrong and it just barely goes in there and you go, oh, that's wrong, and you pull it out and you adjust it and you put it back in. You get it wrong way down in there and it just doesn't pick up the round. You're like, this feels like 90% of what is correct. And then you got to come out that 90%, adjust, go in 90%, still not quite right, come out 90%, adjust, in 100, there it was. And it's like, if there was just something in this gun that the minute you had it wrong, it told you at like 10%, you'd be able to go dunk, 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 dunk. Oh, I got it.
But there isn't. No, he's right. And then unfortunately, sometimes you jam it in, have it 90% there, be like, oh shoot, it's wrong. She's not coming out. And then you just be pretty much fighting it the whole time.
Yeah, if you had a tab bent, if you had like the leading edge bent down on the strip, that was the one that would kill you.
And the worst thing was usually it was the leading tab that was the bent one. The others would be perfect, but the leading tab, that'd be the one to get you every time.
Yeah, it's nightmarish. I can see why they call it the daylight gun.
Yeah, there's no way I could see doing this in the dark or with my eyes closed. Like I can't see that being a thing. Now, granted, I could see someone working this in the daylight with practice getting very good at it.
It's weird to me. You add 2 inches to the side of the gun, which is a lot. But if you added like just like a flared magwell on a pistol, where people flare the magwell so that if you miss by 5 degrees, you just end up in the magwell anyway. If they just flared the opening for this strip so that it guided the strip in with an error of 5 to 10%, loading this would become 3 times easier. I mean, 300% easier.
It'd be amazing the difference. But yeah, unfortunately with this one, it was never able to be the perfect loader, I think, with the current state that it is in.
Right.
But
And it even has things like an indicator on the left side to help you know when you're over center. The indicator isn't all that clear. It's just a little pin that pops out further than it is currently popped.
yeah, and it pops out on the left side, which is not really where you're paying attention to, because honestly, I'm paying attention to the right side where I'm feeding the strip in.
Which is maybe like a team thing where it's like, hey, did it pop? Yeah, it pop. Like that's the thing that we started doing is being like, is it moving? No. Okay. Like
The depression on range from like this one, Ian and myself, it was just...
No one got good at it. No one... Now, mind you, we didn't have that much time with it. I guarantee you the people who took it in a fight got good at it. They worked hard at it.
I'm sure that the teams that, that was their job were very good at it. But unfortunately, that was not what we were setting out to do that day or for our own shoot with it. So...
I don't know that I've ever seen a gun that's easier to get a live round into than a Hotchkiss 1914, and I don't know that I've ever seen a gun that's harder to get a live round into than a Hotchkiss Portative. It's just bizarre that they're in the same family, and it's almost the same mechanism flipped upside down. It's just that the other one, it was right side up. It had a big old feed tray that you could set and slide across, and it guided you where it was supposed to go. This one, you've got to hit the bullseye every time.
And he's right, there is no wiggle room. You're a millimeter off, it's not feeding.
So, okay. We've got through loading, we got through ergonomics. You pull the trigger. Is there any saving this gun?
Lining up my shot with this one, it was just like any standard Mauser sight. I mean, like it's just got this leaf sight back here. I didn't find it difficult for lining up. The trigger was incredibly heavy, which was a bit unexpected, but not something that we haven't dealt with before, and it was something we could certainly power through.
I do remember the first time shooting it, somebody going, is the safety on? It's like, no, bang, oh.
That's pretty much how our experience has been with this one, yeah.
Heavy trigger.
And then the recoil, there's like practically none. It was amazing how little recoil there was with the Portative. I was very pleasantly surprised by that. Now granted, we did experience the issues, like I said, with the tripod that made moving around or stabilizing your shots a little bit difficult, but when the fact that there was like no recoil adding onto it, at least there was that. So there was a good bit of stability there.
Oh yeah, my every prediction with that squirrely tripod was the minute I pulled the trigger, it was going to be like, roar, roar, roar. And actually we had Ian on for our Project Lightning, and we had a prediction from him, and he's like, this tripod's going to go to crap the minute this thing starts firing. But then you start firing it, and the recoil's so mild, you can just lay a hand up on that tripod and just guide it in and walk the gun. It does a really good job under recoil. So the actual firing, the really important part, I thought it did great.
Oh yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. And we made some decent shots with it, I'm not going to lie. So yeah, that was actually quite impressive.
Yeah. In terms of accuracy, where would you rate it though?
I'd probably say it was somewhere in the middle road, because honestly, like I think it just depended on just the further out you got, I feel like it just kind of dispersed the shots a good bit.
Yeah, recoil is mild. It has every chance to deliver a grouping not unlike a Lewis gun, and yet somehow it does not. I think there's a little bit of not being able to follow sights. I think there's a little bit of if the ammo's not kicking up any mud, then I'm not really able to walk it in. However, I think that the gun can perform much better than we gave it. Like, I think this is a gun that I say over and over again, with training, I feel like you could do a lot better with this gun.
I agree. I wholeheartedly do. So yeah, shooting was definitely surprising, I would say, for this one. It did surprisingly well.
So that's a comeback, right? Like, it's a pain to haul, but once you get it there, it does a pretty good job of being a gun, except for loading it. But again, this also has interlocking feed strips, so even though we did not display it because we did not want to risk tying anything up in that action because it's such a pain to clear, theoretically you can link shots.
I can't imagine doing that with this one, seeing as how just loading in a single strip was hard enough, but,
yeah, but
sure.
Just think about this, you don't have to load another strip if you get it right.
Just right.
Yeah, this thing ties up so fast. We unanimously voted to not try anything fancy with the feed system because when it did tie up, it was a beast to clear jams. In theory, you should be able to push up on this button here and just walk her back, but in practice, some spring would overhang or some tab would be bent and it would just lock in and you have to get a pocket knife in there and pry it back. So clearing a jam on this guy, easily one of the worst experiences. I mean...
not fun.
Not a gun I want to have to clear. At least it comes apart fairly easy, so you can get in
Alright.
there and really clear it if you had to. But there's a lot that leaves wanting in that field. So I guess that sort of gets us down to the final question, which is, would you take this into battle? And we have a pretty good basis for comparison now because you've experienced a lot of light machine guns. Where would you put this?
What's the scenario of this? Am I out just on the ground, or am I in a plane or on a tank?
All right, you are correct. This is a possible vehicle-mounted weapon. So you could use it just like it is now, but mounted onto the side of a plane or a tank or something like that. So I take it you favor that. Would you take it if it was mounted in a tank?
Yeah, I would take it if it was mounted in a tank, just because I feel like if it's just set up there on the vehicle, like it's just belt fed, like however many rounds, like sure, it's fine, it's good to go, she's charged and ready. Problem is that if I'm not in a vehicle, I've then got to get it ready with myself, and or my team. Not so much. So
Yeah. So the idea is if she had a long section of, not belt is what we're saying in a casual way, but it's almost like a belt. It's segmented strip. So you can load it with these that get up to like 250 rounds. And then if you're going through the headache of loading it to get 250 rounds, okay, fine. You don't need to, you don't need to do that strip all that often. But I mean, still setting that strip with adrenaline running. Let me tell you. Did you cut yourself?
I managed to cut myself on the strip. Apparently, just holding it. That's what I get for just being in a donk.
Yeah, that's another thing. These are sharp. I think maybe we didn't say that. You got to get them in there just right. If they get stuck, you got to yank them back out, and they're sharp. They're like friggin' razor blades.
I'm gonna rub that on my pants.
I'm gonna have to clean that later. Anyway, Mae bleeds everywhere. So vehicle mount, worth it, you think? Because low recoil, good weight?
I think it is definitely the vehicle mount one. If I'm gonna take it into the battle, it's got to be on a vehicle. Otherwise, it's just too much of a pain.
Even with a crew? Even because you're not doing it alone. You're going to have like 4 dudes with you.
I mean, the problem then becomes like they're going to be the ones loading it like on the ground. It's not really going to be that much of a, I don't know. I just feel like it's just more complicated.
There is a finite amount of training time out there. I want to put that out there. Like machine gun crews by the end of the war were trained really, really well. But if you think about it, if you spend 16 hours drilling on getting this thing loaded just right, but other guns it took all of an hour to drill till you got it loaded just right, like if it's so natural in some other machine guns that you spend very little training time on the actual loading, you get to spend that time somewhere else. So as much as people say, well, they'd be trained and they'd have practice. Yes, and I agree. You could get a lot out of this gun with a lot of practice. I think if you master this gun, great. But there's not a lot of that going on in the middle of a battlefield. Like, there's people that are getting good training, but they're trying to train them on multiple machine guns, on multiple systems to be ready for anything. And this is tying down a lot of resource time to get good at this system, whereas a 5-hour introduction on another system is almost everything you need. And so that would be my concern too. If you're thinking of it in the macro sense, if I'm an army, I'm not looking to adopt this. I'm looking to adopt something like the Lewis gun. I'm looking to adopt a heavy machine gun instead of it in certain places.
But this is a light machine gun. If you think of it in that respect, it does okay.
Yeah, it's not an automatic rifle. It's not like a Shosha or a BAR, so of course it's fine it's heavy. It's got the crow's foot tripod is so weird, but it kind of works. Like, I see where they were going. I see where it worked. I see what tests it passed. I just don't know that it passed the test of actually serving in something like the Great War, what actually happened in the conflict. I would be very nervous using this. I would almost prefer me and 4 other dudes with bolt-action rifles than me with this thing, mostly because I don't trust myself. It's not the gun. The gun runs. It's just my interaction with it is so poor and I constantly make mistakes with it.
Well, this is why I wanted it on the vehicle, for the yes, because then I can get away quickly.
Yeah, I'm going to shoot somebody and the minute it runs out of ammo, I'm going to leave.
Run away.
Yeah. All right, so you'd say soft no, since we're thinking infantry use?
Soft no, yes, for infantry use.
Now, would you own one?
Oh, yeah, that'd be dope, but, I will dream. I will just dream for now.
Yeah, I would own one in a heartbeat. I'd be proud to own one because, and a lot of people don't get this. We did Project Lightning and Ian's 30-06 Shosha that he owns came in last place. Sorry, spoilers if anybody didn't get around to watching that yet. But people are going, oh man, Ian came on the show and his own gun did so poorly and he rated his own gun so poorly. There's no ego in it when you're a collector. Collectors don't want, like real collectors don't want to have the best. As a matter of fact, sometimes it's a race to get the worst. Like some of the worst stuff out there, or the weirdest is the best stuff.
The Widowmaker shotgun?
Yeah, but those aren't all that highly collectible. But you see people collecting a lot of like Volkstrom stuff like that, just stuff that was like, things that are too premature. So like this gun, you gotta think about it. There's the Madsen, and then there's this gun, and then a bunch of other light machine guns show up. This is a very old light machine gun design. We're talking about like 1907. And yet mostly unchanged until the Great War, in a time where light machine guns were really just being discovered. That's pretty good. Like, as much as I want to tease it, it is an infant of a design. Well, I shouldn't say it's the old man of a design by the war, but I mean, this is a very, very, very early light machine gun. It's predated pretty much only by the Madsen. That's impressive.
Well, now that he has gushed, unless there's something else you want to add, I think we're pretty much good for this gun for tonight.
Yeah, we wrapped it up nicely. It's a beautiful piece. I want to thank Chuck for lending it over here, because we're so glad to have it, and he let us put it through the ropes.
Thank you.
Hopefully we're returning it better than it came here, because Mark has worked his magic. So if you watch Anvil, you'll know. He's done a lot of little things to get this thing geared up just right, so thank you, Mark. But otherwise, stay until after the credits for any updates, and we'll see you for our next episode.
Have a good one, guys.
Alright gang, not a lot to update because Mae and I are mostly focused on gearing episode production back up to full steam, and then hopefully pulling ahead. We're also trying to get some of these machine guns home to their proper owners, so expect a few automatic episodes in the near future. Now, there are a handful of the limited edition Project Lightning patches still available on the site. They are going to be gone very soon, so get yours while you can. Also, we've had a number of artists submit, C&Rsenal or lightning-themed art recently, and I've been enjoying it quite a bit. Now, a lot of this goes through our Instagram, so you can follow us there, but I went ahead and listed a couple here. Thanks a lot, guys. I actually really enjoy this kind of engagement. It's hilarious. All right, have a good one.